Yet more elections took place in early June, with the Czech Civic Forum and its Slovakian counterpart Public Against Violence taking a total of 87 seats in the Chamber of Peoples and 83 in the Chamber of Nations. In Czechoslovakia they had 2 equal houses, with the former represented by proportional representation and the latter a constituency-based system. The Communist Party, though, did better than expected, winning about 13% of the national vote and beating Public Against Violence into third place in the proportionally elected Chamber of People. Although Václav Havel's coalition had enough seats to form a majority anyway, they wanted to form a broader government and said they would consider working with any other party except the Communists and the right-wing separatist Slovak National Party. And in Bulgaria, where the system had been recently reorganised to work just like that in Czechoslovakia, the Bulgarian Socialist Party, the old Communists rebranded, and having abandoned Marxism-Leninism, were elected with an outright majority, securing a total of 211 of the 400 available seats across both PR-elected and constituency-elected houses. However, the leader of the Socialist Party, Alexander Lilov, did not take the prime ministership himself, instead continuing to support the incumbent, Andrei Lukyanov, who had been in place since February as a kind of placeholder following the toppling of dictator Todor Zhivkov. Lukyanov tried to organise a coalition government, but the opposition Union of Democratic Forces refused, saying essentially that the communists got the country into this mess, so now the socialists would have to own it. Even the heart of the Soviet Union didn't seem immune from the outbreak of national feelings, as the members of the Supreme Soviet of the Russian Federation elected Boris Yeltsin as their chairman by a wafer-thin majority of 50.52%. Yeltsin had been a senior figure in the Moscow Communist Party for many years, but had often butted heads with Mikhail Gorbachev, and indeed in 1987 had become the first person in Soviet history to voluntarily resign from the Politburo, over his feelings that Gorbachev had broken promises made to him about fixing certain problems in Moscow. At the time, Gorby himself was on his way across the Atlantic, having a brief meeting in Ottawa before heading on to Washington for a 4-day summit with President Bush aimed at working out a new framework for US-Soviet relations in a post-Cold War era. Gorbachev accepted the so-called Helsinki principles of respecting the territory of states and promoting democratic values, and agreed to the peaceful reunification of Germany, and even the new unified nations continued membership of NATO, as long as the organisation was reformed and the new Germany would never have nuclear weapons. They also agreed to sign a bilateral accord banning all production of chemical weapons and beginning to destroy existing stocks. No sooner was Gorbachev back home than violence broke out in the Kyrgyz SSR in the cities of Osh and Uzgun, and surrounding villages between the majority Kyrgyz and minority Uzbek populations, occasioned by disputes in this case over the distribution of the land from a collective farm that had been decollectivized, with even the local police splitting along ethnic lines and demonstrations in the capital of Frunze, now known as Bishkek, demanding the resignation of the regional leadership. Soviet troops were finally sent in, though they were only instructed to seal the border with the Uzbek SSR to prevent people crossing over and just try and calm things down generally. Official estimates range from 300 to 600 deaths in the clashes, but unofficial estimates rate that as high as 10,000. Elsewhere, the Iraqi President Saddam Hussein hosted a summit of regional leaders, including Colonel Gaddafi of Libya, Yasser Arafat of Palestine, the new President of United Yemen, Ali Abdullah Saleh, King Fahd of Saudi Arabia, and Emir Jaber of Kuwait. While the summit was ostensibly to discuss the increasing levels of migration of Jewish people from the USSR to Israel, as the Soviet state continued to fragment, there was a private meeting afterwards to discuss Kuwait, which Saddam felt was hurting Iraqi oil revenues by undercutting them on price. Emir Jaber left with threats ringing in his ear. And the FIFA World Cup kicked off in Italy, the first to be recorded and transmitted in HD TV, in a pioneering partnership between Italian and Japanese broadcasters RAI and NHK. Of course, almost nobody could actually receive HD TV at the time, but even on a normal cathode ray TV, the pictures looked much sharper than they had 4 years ago in Mexico. 3 teams, Costa Rica, Ireland and the United Arab Emirates, would make their World Cup debuts, while several others had qualified after long absences, most notably the USA, which had been controversially chosen to host the 1994 tournament despite not having qualified since 1950. Romania had last appeared in 1970, Colombia in 1962, and Egypt had made their only previous appearance in 1934. Two notable absences were Mexico, whose ban for fielding an overage player during a youth tournament had helped pave the way for US qualification, and France, who came third in 1986 but had had a lacklustre qualification campaign and lost out to Scotland. Each group was assigned 2 cities to play in, with Argentina thoughtfully scheduled for Naples, where Diego Maradona played his club football, though they would play their opener, the first game of the tournament, at the newly refurbished San Siro Stadium in Milan. With the reputation of English fans, especially in conjunction with the game against Ireland, the authorities decided to base Group F on the island of Sicily, thinking they could stop ferries, trains and flights and isolate everyone there if need be. The opening game saw an upset right from the off, as 1986 winners Argentina went down to a 1-0 defeat by unfancied Cameroon, who were down to 9 men by the end, while the following day hosts Italy laboured to a 1-0 win over Austria thanks to a late goal by substitute Salvatore Toto Schillaci, making just his second appearance for his country. By the day of the Canadian Grand Prix, just over half of the first batch of games had been played, and by the time of the next race in Mexico, the group stages would just be over and the knockout phase about to start. And so to Canada, where after the traditional raft race, Ferrari had creatively misinterpreted the brief and motorised their raft, Tyrrell the moral victors. Once again, Rob Hurley was in the pits with his camcorder and a press pass. Thank you again, Rob, for uploading this footage, and the rest of you, go check out the link in the description for the full footage from warm-up and pre-qualifying. There were no major changes to any of the cars or who was driving them, but behind-the-scenes shenanigans continued at Leighton House, which seemed to be descending into factional rivalries, while team manager Ian Phillips remained in hospital, and at Monteverde Onyx, where an injunction brought by Stefan Johansson to stop the team relocating to Switzerland had been brought but then dealt with, so the move could now go ahead, and there had been a veritable exodus of team staff who didn't want to move. One of them, team founder Alan Jenkins, had signed on as chief designer with Arrows. The Life team reportedly sold the majority of its equity to an Italian consortium who were said to have inquired with Team Lotus about buying their leftover Judd engines from last year, and Eurobrunn had fired Claudio Langes, failed to find a replacement, and red-facedly hired him back. Rumours linked Williams test driver Mark Blundell as a potential future replacement, the Briton having become the youngest ever pole sitter at Le Mans the week before the Montreal race. Aguri Suzuki had also been at Le Mans and had a very nasty shunt. He'd been hit about 4 hours in by leader Gianfranco Brancatelli's Nissan but was unhurt, which paved the way for the 2 Tom Walkinshaw Jaguars to put in a 1-2 finish. There was controversy before the race, as the FIA had ruled it a non-championship event because of new rules that no circuit have a straight longer than 2 kilometres, which led to defending champions Sauber Mercedes pulling out. Then during the race, Martin Brundle's number 4 Jaguar was back in 11th, so Tom Walkinshaw, wanting to make sure a Briton in a Jaguar did well, swapped him into the leading number 3 car in place of Chilean veteran Eliseo Salazar, who was still waiting to take his turn and excited at his big chance. Brundle, with John Nielsen and Price Cobb, were the race winners despite the car missing 4th gear, while Salazar's car broke down before Luis Perez Sala had even had a chance to drive it. So, it was time for pre-qualifying, and at least the Life team seemed to be enjoying themselves, even if they did spend more time tinkering with the car than actually running it. Roberto Moreno topped the timing sheets in the Eurobrunn, followed by Guiar and then the Lola pair, both making it through as usual, though less dominantly than previously. AGS was still frustratingly just off the pace, Tarquini missing out by just 0.011 seconds this time, with the usual suspects of Langes, Gasho and Giacomelli, as usual, miles off the pace. And our intrepid newshound Hurley did actually manage to capture Bruno going past on one of the 7 laps he managed before his engine died. So it was the usual 4 going through to qualifying proper, where, as usual, Senna set the pace on Friday, and then on Saturday it rained, so it would be Friday's times that set the grid, and Ayrton had the pole once again, just 0.66 seconds ahead of Berger, with Prost third alongside Nannini, and Piquet just behind, a great showing for Benetton. Last year's winner Boutsen lined up 6th, with Mansell 7th after losing time on Friday with a puncture. Alesi was 8th on his first appearance in Canada, ahead of Patrese and Modena, and the 2 Loti. Guiar did well to put the Azella 15th, while the Scuderia Italia and Minardi teams were both plagued with electronic problems that stopped their engines getting up to max revs. Both Onyxes qualified despite all the turmoil there, but the similarly unsettled Leighton House could only manage 24th for Capelli and another DNQ for Gugelmin. He would join Moreno, Barilla and Brabham on the pit wall for Sunday, while Eric Bernard would have to start in the spare after destroying his race car during Saturday's session. Sunday morning dawned wet, so the morning warm-up was even more crucial than usual, as everyone took the opportunity to get the hang of the circuit in race trim in the wet, especially those who were new to the track. By race time though, the rain had stopped and the track was starting to dry out, but still wet enough for everyone to start on grooved tyres, and the strategy of when to come in and change to slicks could turn out to be decisive. And Pirelli, though not Goodyear, had an intermediate tyre, a grooved slick available, which could muddy the waters further. The red lights went on and Berger stuttered forward early before lifting, then getting going again to keep second, while Prost got away quite badly and dropped to 6th behind Nannini, Alesi and Piquet by the end of lap 1. Minardi's dreadful weekend was compounded when Martini was nudged into a spin on turn 2 of lap 1 by Suzuki and he couldn't get it restarted. The car was still there when the leaders came back round the next time, and the time after that it had been rotated 90 degrees but still wasn't exactly in a safe place. Boutsen passed Prost for 6th on lap 4, while Warwick, who'd led here last year in his Arrows for a few laps, was bearing down on the other Williams of Patrese. Nannini, meanwhile, was pulling away from Alesi as a distinct dry line was starting to appear on the wetter parts of the circuit. On lap 10 it was announced that Berger was judged to have jumped the start and that he would be given a 60-second penalty which would be added to his time at the end of the race, just as Patrese came in to be the first to go on to slicks in a rather leisurely stop. Berger followed him in for slicks shortly afterwards. Piquet caught and passed Alesi, who was struggling on his Pirelli wets, so the Benettons were now 2nd and 3rd. A lap later, as Alboreto and Pirro climbed out of their respective cars after coming together, Senna pitted for slicks himself in a much better stop than Patrese's, and there was a flurry of others including Piquet and Warwick, plus a little queue of Alesi, Boutsen and Prost, which put the Ferrari back out on track in front of the others after a lightning stop. Senna had come back out onto track just in front of Berger, but moved over to allow his teammate through, knowing that he was no real threat to the win with his penalty and not inclined to get in the way of the Austrian's attempt to make up time. Nannini's lead over Senna was 17 seconds when he came in on lap 16, but the stop was a slow one, while Senna nearly had a moment as he left the dry line to lap Modena and hit a wet patch under the bridge. So with Berger first on the track but effectively 8th, Senna led with Prost and Boutsen now 2nd and 3rd and making their way through a crowd of backmarkers. Nannini had gone back out after his slow stop and almost immediately and off camera hit a stray groundhog somewhere out on the circuit and had to come back in for a new nose. Once Prost and Boutsen were through the traffic, they continued running close together, with 4th place Piquet occasionally in view behind them and slowly reeling them in. As the pair came to lap Larini's Ligier, sticking doggedly to the dry line, Prost was balked and Boutsen saw his chance, diving out to take both, only to put a wheel on a wet bit and gracefully pirouette into the Ligier, taking both of them out and leaving Prost somehow completely untouched. As Boutsen limped back to the pits to retire, Alesi then had a spin in exactly the same spot and returned to the track spreading mud and gravel everywhere. All that put Piquet up to 3rd, while his old buddy Nigel Mansell, in desperate need of a good result, was now right behind him, and both of them were bearing down on Prost. Nannini hit the wet patch under the bridge while lapping Nakajima, but unlike Senna, he went straight off backwards and embedded his Benetton in the tyre wall. Berger, now up to 5th on timing, with Senna just behind him on the track, were coming through traffic and had come up to Alesi, who'd just taken Donnelly as he made his way back up the order after his spin. Not long after Senna got past, Jean hit that wet patch under the bridge and followed Nannini's trajectory straight into the Benetton, which he completely demolished and then ended up parking sideways atop the wall. Fortunately, neither Alesi nor anyone else was hurt, but it certainly made a mess. Prost, Piquet and Mansell were still going at it hammer and tongs over 2nd through 4th places, with Berger 5th on times and Patrese and Warwick have an equally fun scrap over 6th, as the Lotus seemed to be finally working well enough at least to pass the Williams, with Donnelly also bearing down in 8th. The Northern Irish rookie was about to be lapped by the Prost-Piquet-Mansell train, in fact, as Mansell set fastest lap just after the halfway point, faster than Senna's lap record from last year. Soon enough they were passed as Patrese came in to retire with fading brakes. Wojtek was the next up to be lapped, again in his case, and as they slowed for the hairpin, Piquet took the opportunity to nip inside Prost and take 2nd. At the same place next lap, Mansell did exactly the same thing, as Prost's brakes were also beginning to fade. Before long, Derek Warwick was heaving into view behind him. As the race now entered its final stages, Mansell set another lap record, some 2 seconds faster than last year's, as he chased Piquet, then Senna immediately broke it, while Martin Donnelly toured off with the busted Lamborghini, retirement number 13. Mansell was flying, Senna was flying, and so was Berger, who was still trying to make up time on his penalty, with Senna as his rear gunner. A furious Mansell was balked by 8th place Caffey and shook his fist, then nearly lost it on the marbles as he elbowed his way past. Guillard was an easier pass, but Mansell had lost momentum in his pursuit of Piquet, while he now had Prost right back with him instead. With 3 laps to go, Piquet was briefly held up by 7th place Modena, who waved him through, followed by Mansell and Prost, while it was now Berger's turn to smash the lap record. The Austrian crossed the line first, but of course Senna took the win, despite running much of the race with no first gear, unknown to anyone except the McLaren pit crew. Piquet, Mansell and Prost came through next, but the 2 Ferraris, finishing 2.5 seconds apart, were split by Berger, who was classified 4th, pushing Prost down to 5th, as not only the last man on the lead lap, but actually on the lead 2 laps, as 6th placed Warwick was 2 laps down. He wouldn't care, having scored his and the Lotus team's first point of the year. So, Senna extended his championship lead, with Berger still second, ahead of Prost, and Piquet moving up to 5th after his 20th career second place and his first podium visit since Australia 1988. Meanwhile, Ferrari moved back ahead of Williams in second place in the constructors' race, and the teams began to pack up the motorhomes for the long trip south to Mexico City, where the conditions could hardly be more different.